Hey guys, it's Lisa and welcome to my channel. Today's video is a compilation of my 10 favorite DIY flowers that I've done in the past. And I'm also going to add a new one. DIY number 1 is a flower that I've used most often. And I use a fabric called Warm and Natural, and this is a quilt batting. This is a fabric that you can't tear, and I usually like to tear my fabric for flowers, but this one has to be cut. But you just cut a strip that's about maybe 3/4 of an inch wide, and that's completely up to you. But then you're gonna tie a knot in the very end of it, and then you're gonna glue that knot to the center of a circle. And it doesn't have to be perfect. As you can see, mine is very imperfect. But you want your circle to be close to what the size of your flower is going to be in the end. And you can, if you make your circle too large, you can always trim around the edge when you're done. But and if you actually want to make it larger, you can just keep going past that circle because you're actually gluing it to the part before. But you're just going to twist and glue. And you can twist in one direction for a while and then twist in the other direction. When you do that, it adds a different dimension to it, and it just adds a little bit more realism to it, I guess. But you're just going to keep twisting and gluing, and that's literally all that you do to make this flower. It's a very, very simple flower, but I think it is one that goes more in most of the crafts that you would do. I mean, that's just my opinion. This is my favorite one. But I'm going to be doing some more. But this is just one. And you don't have to use Warm and Natural on this fabric. You can actually use different types of fabrics. DIY number 2 is another easy flower. It takes a little bit more time. But you start with a wire circle or even a plastic circle. You could use bracelets for this. You can use just a heavy gauge wire, and which is what I'm using here. Mine happens to be a rusty wire, but it really doesn't matter. This is not going to show at all. So anything that you can make a circle out of that is sturdy. And I find that the little child's bracelets work better than anything, or you can use bangle bracelets, just a lady's bangle bracelet. Just whatever you have available. And you're going to use, I'm using raffia grass here, and you're just going to cut some strips of it and just fold it in half and feed your tails through the folded part until you cover the whole thing. Now you could also use corn shucks here, and it's the time of year that those are pretty readily available. And you could just kind of tear those into strips and use those as well. Now once you cover the whole thing, then you'll want to trim your raffia grass to be a little more uniform. Now you may not want it exact, whatever you choose. That's the good thing about these DIY flowers is they're very forgiving. So, and you can kind of tailor them to look like whatever type of flower you want to. But I'm cutting mine somewhat even all the way around. And again, if you want yours shorter even, you could cut it shorter than this. And once you have the petals finished, the inside is very, very simple. You're just going to cut a piece of fabric. And I'm using the Warm and Natural on this one also because I want this one to be more of a neutral flower. And I'm just going to glue it all the way around. Now you want this circle to be a little bit larger than your wire circle. So now once you get one side done, now you're going to glue some polyfill to the other side, and you're going to cut a circle the same size that you did on the other side, and then you're going to glue it all the way around. Now this is a little bit tougher because you want to keep that polyfill inside the circle as you glue. You'll see on the next flower that I'm doing, I found a little bit easier way to do this. And what I did was start gluing this second circle on and just left an opening to stuff it with that polyfill, which was much, much easier. And also on this one, I'm going to add a stem to this one. And instead of completely closing it, I left room also for a stick that I had cut from the yard. So when you do the other method that I'm going to do in the other flower, you could just glue it almost all the way around, and then you could stuff it with the polyfill and then stick your stick inside it before you finish gluing it. Now here I've just brushed some regular Elmer's school glue around the edges because I want more darkness around the edges. And then I just kind of worked it into the rest of the center of the flower. And that gave this a really natural look and a neutral palette. And here I'm using burlap for the leaf. So you just cut a piece of burlap that is about the length of 2 leaves, plus just a little. And then you're going to fold it in half and cut it in the shape of a leaf. And then because they're still connected, you'll just kind of wrap that around your stem, and that will be your leaf. DIY number 3 is a similar flower, but with this one, I'm going to be using scraps of fabric instead. So for this one, I've cut strips of fabric, and these are probably about 4 or 5 inches long, and maybe a little less than a 1/2 inch in width. Again, just like the other one, this could be made with thicker pieces, or just however you want to cut it, or tear it is what I've done. So I like to tear fabric when I can because it gives it more of a frayed natural look that I just happen to like. But so I've torn these in strips and cut them to fit this. Now for this particular one, you want a fabric that is thin enough to work with, but also is printed on both sides. That really helps because you're going to be seeing this from all angles. And for this one, I've just used a little child's bangle bracelet. So just like with the last one, you're going to loop these onto the bracelet all the way around. And then you're going to cut a circle that is a little bit larger than your opening. Now this one I have used burlap on, and you just want to cut it. And again, this is a fabric you can't tear, but the burlap will unravel around the edges on its own. So you just want to glue that to both sides. And what I didn't show here is I did stuff just a little bit of cotton in this one, or a little bit of polyfill, not very much at all. And then I cut these down to the same length. And you can pull at them and cause them to fray a little bit, and that helps the look of them also. DIY number 4. And I can't take credit for this one. This one is done by my sister. So I'm just showing the process of her doing this flower. Now what she is using is something that is readily available, and she's going to make this flower with a canning lid. And you're going to use the whole canning lid. So for the ring, she's just using the ring here to draw a circle where she wants it on this printed burlap. Again, you could use whatever fabric you choose to use, but she's using her ring here as a template. And just tracing that out and cutting it, and you're gonna want 2 of these circles. So once you have your circles cut out, then you can move on to the petals. And you're also gonna want 1 cardboard circle the same size. Now she used a cotton fabric on the yellow flower that you see there, but for this flower, she's using a curtain shear. And these are very readily available and they're very inexpensive. You can thrift them at a very good price usually. And even if you have to buy them new, you can buy them very cheap. But what she's done here, or what we've done with this fabric prior to this, is dipped it in a container of water with some paint in it. And so you just keep adding, and we use chalk paint here, the color that you want. And we also used the color Tea Rose and Buttercream. And we just kept adding those until we liked the color, and then you put the fabric in there. And you don't want to add too much, because I didn't for this. I want this to have a soft color. But if it's not enough, if it doesn't turn your fabric the way you want it, then you can take your fabric out and add just a little bit more paint. Just make sure that you get it stirred up really well before you put it on, or you'll have some dark spots that don't look quite as good. So now she's cut the same burlap, printed burlap on this one, and she's gluing that first circle inside the ring. So you want that lip to be on the bottom here, and then it kind of catches your fabric. And then she's going to stuff her polyfill in, and then put her jar lid on top of that. Now this is one that could look like one of my favorite flowers is a coneflower. And if you were to put quite a bit of the polyfill in it before you put this lid on, then it's going to give it that puffy center that looks so much like a coneflower. And then after she glued this on, and you just kind of glue around the edges the best that you can, and then you're going to use that cardboard circle and glue that to the very back. And because she didn't want the edges to be kind of unfinished like they are here, she took some jute twine and glued it all the way around to neaten up that edge. Now you could also add a stem to this one, but for this she just added a loop to the end of that jute twine so that she could hang it. And it could also be used without the loop as a bowl filler. Project number 5 is another very simple flower, and you're going to take a strip of fabric. In this case, it doesn't have to be printed on both sides. So you're going to cut your strip about, and you could tear this, it really doesn't matter on this one, but you're going to cut a strip of fabric as wide as twice the length that you want your petals. And then to make this quicker to cut, I folded it a few times, and now I'm going to cut my petals the shape that I want them all together, and then you're just going to put glue these around a little, in this case, bangle bracelet. So you're going to take your glue, and I'm just using regular hot glue here, and you're going to glue all around the edge. Now this could be done without gluing around the edge if you use double-sided fabric, but I'm just going to glue this all the way around the edge, and I'm going to glue several of these on here, and they're going to be bunched up together. So that will give you kind of a pleat in the center of the petal and give it a much better look. So just keep gluing these on, and then after you glue a couple on, then you're just going to add some hot glue to kind of push them together, and so that you can crowd several on there. And I'm not going to say how many to add, just keep adding them till you like the look. And once you get your bracelet covered, then you're going to cut a circle for that center, just like we did the other flowers. And I'm going to use the burlap on this one, but I'm not using a printed burlap, but I do want it to be printed. So I'm just using one of my stencils that I like the look of, and stenciling on that before I cut it out. And I'm using StazOn ink here, but you don't have to use StazOn ink for this one at all. And I'm using these little makeup brushes that I use for my stenciling, and I will add those in the description. And then you're just going to glue that circle on like we did the other flowers, and add the polyfill. Again, this is one that you can add a stem on, or you can use as a bow filler. And I chose on this one to add some rickrack trim around the outside of the circle. Obviously, that's totally up to you, and you could use any kind of trim that you choose. I think that the jute trim from the Dollar Tree, the jute lace, would look really pretty added to this also. Project number 6 is also a very easy flower. And for this one, you just want some fall colored squares. And I just cut these out, and you could rip them if you wanted. And some of these have been ripped on one side because you can rip the strips, but then you have to cut the square, if that makes sense. But you're just going to need some squares. You can put them together like this, all together, or you can start to alternate your corners. And to be honest, I think alternating the corners helps a little bit. So you're just going to keep gluing those on, and here's where I'm alternating the corners and making them a different place. Now these are going to get clipped off once this is all put together. But I guess what I like about alternating them is you get some shorter areas and longer areas inside the flower that just gives it more dimension. So you just keep gluing them on, and I think I did about maybe 7 or 8, but I just kept gluing them on until I felt like I would have enough depth in my flower. And you're just pinching it together when you glue them, and that adds your puffiness and texture. And now here's where I'm just going to clip those corners a little bit. Now I don't want this to be exactly round. I just want to get rid of those sharp corners. So I clipped all those off all the way around, and then I just fluffed this up. And I just took my hands and fluffed it for a while, but I also wanted some fraying. And also, before I did this, I almost forgot to mention, I clipped into the center all the way around. And this is very easy to do without going too far because you have that hot glue in the center. So you just glue until you just cut until your scissors don't go any further. And now you're just going to really, really fluff that up. Now, I took my finger sander afterwards and ruffled up the edges even more because that will do some fraying for you, which I think is really pretty. Now, you have 2 choices here. You can do what I'm doing and just take that back layer and fold it and glue it around your stick. But you could also make 2 of these and glue one to one side of the stick and one to the other. That will give you an even fuller flower, but I'm just showing you here what you could do. And you can also add some leaves to this, just like we did the other flowers. Project number 7 is a variation of one of the other flowers, but I made this one intentionally to look like the coneflower. So you have two options here. You could use the curtain shear like I've used, that I have dyed with some watered down paint, or you could use just an old white sheet that you've dyed that way. But here I'm using a much larger circle for the center with the fabric Warm and Natural that I have coffee stained ahead of time and let it dry. And then I am gluing this in, but as you can see, I'm really pushing that out where it will look like that big center of the coneflower. And I think this just makes a really pretty flower for an arrangement. And you can put it, like if you're wanting to put an arrangement maybe in an old crock or something like that, then you can, this makes a really pretty one. You can just use some sticks from the yard and it makes a good oversized arrangement. So once you get this glued in place and it's secure all the way around, then you're going to stuff your polyfill inside until you've got a pretty good amount so that it's really heaped up. And then you can glue another circle on the back that isn't larger than, that isn't quite as large as the front to finish that back off. And then obviously before you finish closing this, you'll add your stem to the inside. And then I brushed some glue on this, and I just used regular school glue, and then sprinkled it pretty heavily with some cinnamon. And what I forgot that I did on this one, because I did it so long ago, was I just took my scissors and cut a little hole in the center and then put the stick in that way and glued it. So that when they're in an arrangement, that puffy top will be on the top. Project number 8 is another very easy flower, and it doesn't take long at all to make this one. What you need are just several circles, and you're going to start with the first circle. That's going to be your center. And then each of the other circles, you're just going to glue them on, pinching the center. So what I did was just go on opposite sides here, and I'm going to do 4 on this part of it. And then this one, I guess, could look somewhat like a dogwood. If you left it like this, and just cut a little bit of shape to the outer edge, and depending on what you put on the inside, that could be a dogwood. But I'm going to layer this up some more. So I took, this is more of a lacy fabric, and I am gluing these 4 just right between the ones on the back. As you can see, this is very simple. And then for the center, you could add a button. I'm taking another piece of lace that is different from the other and just bunching it up in the center, and then I'm gluing this little pearl. So as you can see, these, you could make these so quickly and just have a bunch of these made up before you knew it. And you could also put buttons in the center or a different type of fabric, but I think that those are just really simple to make. Now here is another thing that you could add to the back. And I'm just adding some lace and kind of pleating it as I go. Now if you used a lace that was already pleated heavily, then obviously you wouldn't have to pleat it. But I just did this just to add another layer to this. But you can just kind of add whatever you want to these. And again, these are just so simple to make. Project number 9 is another very simple flower. And for this one, you're going to need gathered lace. Now, if you don't have lace that is already gathered, then you can make your own pleated gathered lace, but I'm just going to use the kind that's already gathered, and I'm actually going to gather it just a little bit more. So I'm taking a circle here and gluing this on the outer edge of the circle. Now, whatever size you want to make this, then your circle is going to determine your size. So just keep pleating it, and as you can see, when you're using hot glue, and I would use low temp here, you can pleat that just as much or as little as you want just by pushing it while it's still wet. And so I'm just going all the way around the outer edge doing this. And then with a separate piece, I start gluing just to the inner edge of that first layer and doing the same thing, just pleating it as I go. And obviously this strip is going to take a much shorter piece, but you'll just keep gluing that way until you get all the way, that layer all the way finished. And then all you're going to do is add a button to the center. Now this is where you could add whatever you want to your center, and I think a piece of jewelry, maybe an earring or something like that, would be really pretty, or a brooch of some kind would be even prettier. So this one, again, just a very, very simple, quick flower. Project number 10, and this is a really good one, I feel like, for fall. So you'll start with a very long piece of fabric. I am using Warm and Natural here. This is probably an inch or maybe a little bit more wide, and you're going to fold it together. Now, when you glue it, you want to glue on the edge here because you don't want that glue stopping your scissors when you do some cutting later. You just want to glue that edge together. Now, you want to start with a long piece, but if it isn't long enough for the flower that you do, it's not a problem because these can easily be pieced together. So once you glue that together, now you have this long tube. So after you have your tube, you're going to take your scissors and just cut little slits all the way to your glue. You have to be a little careful with this because you can cut through that glue, but the glue does act as a guide and it's a little harder to cut all the way through. If you cut all the way through, though, again, this can be pieced, so you can still use the whole thing. It just makes it a little easier on you if you don't cut all the way through. But you can put these as close together as you want. Mine maybe probably less than a centimeter, maybe a centimeter. But I'm going to start out with a circle. And your circle is just going to give you a guide. And I'm going to start on the outside of it and glue this all the way around, leaving my cut side, obviously, on the outside. Now this one you don't have to gather. You're just going to keep gluing. And then when you get that first round glued, then you're just going to keep going and step in just a little bit with your next layer. And you just keep going. Now it's very easy to sit down for a few hours and just make several of all of these different flowers. They're not very time consuming at all, and I think that they make very good bowl fillers, very good arrangements. But here you're just going to keep going until you fill in that area. Now you can leave the center open and add a center, but for this one I'm just going to fluff it all up, and it almost resembles a mum. And if you did if you wanted it to look even more like a mum, you could, after you glue your tube together, you could take your scissors and slice that tube back open, and then this would just be fluffier. Or if you wanted to use a cotton fabric,
and do that, then it would unravel and just give you a really, really good look. Now here I'm showing you that you can do this same one and leave that center open and add something else to the center. And I'm just making one of those little shabby roses that I made in the very beginning of this video to fill that in. You could also fill that in with a button or a piece of jewelry. And you can keep this center small if you want, or you can just keep going as far as you think you want to go. And now I promised one bonus DIY. And this one is
on this
another
one,
simple
I have
one.
I
think
think
all of these have been simple.
circles.
And just use whatever circle you want to your size to be. So you could use a bowl or something like that. But I didn't worry about cutting these exactly in a circle. I traced the circle and just was kind of haphazard in how I cut them. Now, both sides are going to be showing of all of these. And although the printed yellow one here is only printed on one side, it's going to work for this particular one because it's just going to add some lighter and darker shades of yellow. And what we're making here is a sunflower. And now I'm using, on the inside, I'm using a smaller circle of felt. So I need to cut two of these a little smaller. You can probably tell this one is added on. This is something that I'm working on today. And the reason I say you can tell is because my craft room somewhat echoes, and part of the reason is because I've taken some of the things out so that I can work my way around in there. So for this circle, I've just found something that will work, and this is my Dixie Belle wax. But and this is a little larger than I want it, and you want this to be larger than you want it, not as large as your other circles, but larger than you want it. And the reason is because we're going to stitch around this, and I'm putting one on both sides, and you're not going to be able to see the other side when you're stitching. So if you make this quite a bit larger than you want it, then you'll have some excess that you can cut away, but it will keep you from missing that circle, if that makes sense. So once I got this cut out, I put all my circles together and put the brown circle on both outsides. And then I pinned all that together. And then I stitched around the brown, leaving a seam allowance, a pretty good size seam allowance, again, so that I don't miss the other side. And I stitched around. You can either hand stitch this or you can stitch it on the machine, but I stitched it almost all the way around, except I left room to stuff it. And then you can do one of two things. Now what I did was stuff just one side of the brown. What really makes more sense, and I should have done, was just stuff the center of the yellow. That way when I go to stitch around it, it's not as hard to keep that yellow or that polyfill inside. But it works this way too, and also it would add more dimension on the other side if I had stuffed the middle. And then I finished stitching it closed, and then I cut away the extra seam allowance that I didn't need. And obviously I did that on both sides. And then I started cutting slits around the outer edge up to where my brown circle is. And because that's a thicker fabric, again, it was easier to stop. It gave me a place that my scissors didn't want to go any further. So and how close you make these little slits is completely up to you, just whatever you think the sunflower petals should, whatever size you think they should be. So I stitched all the way around the yellow circle. And this next step I feel like is very necessary. I just took my finger sander, and you can use any sander that you want to, or anything that you think would rough it up. And I just keep roughing that up all the way around one side and all the way around the other. And you can also go back and do some extra. But what you're going for is you want these edges to really fray. And it takes a little bit to get it as much as you want it, unless you like things a little neater than I do. But this step really does help. And then there is your sunflower, and it makes a good bow filler. Or before you close it completely, you can add your stem and leaves just like with the others. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great evening, and God bless you and your family.